Well, Hans, this week we've got an awful lot of news that's busting out of the Trump court cases. We'll get to that. That's absolutely worth talking about. But one of the things that I still think isn't getting enough attention and focus is the lawfare aspect of it. Everybody's focused on the FBI and the fact that they authorized deadly force. But I just don't want to lose sight of the drivers of this case, the people, the operatives that have actually been pushing, well, effectively every single, Trump court case. And, we've even seen these guys going to the actual cases themselves, appearing in court as observers. And of course, we're talking about guys like Ben Witz and Norman Eisen, the people that have really been driving all of the court cases. Ben Witz was the guy that kind of made the call to arms to get all the legal operatives going. And Eisen has been the guy that's really picked up the details and has done all the kind of nitty gritty work for, really every single Trump court case. I mean, we're talking about going back to Mueller, we're talking about impeachment, and we're talking about all the current lawfare. And he's involved to this day.
You're absolutely right. They privatized public functions, and we've talked about this on a previous show, of course, and it's really come into focus through this Trump case. And I agree, it's not talked about enough. As you mentioned, a lot of these prosecutions or cases or witch hunts, whatever you want to call them, depending on how far they go, going back to Mueller, as you mentioned, are not actually run or not actually the brainchilds or the brain children, I don't even know if that's a word, of the people who nominally are doing this kind of stuff. So for Mueller, totally overlooked that the lawfare people gave him like a roadmap, like here's what you need to do. They did the heavy lifting, they did the research, they did all the sort of legal thinking behind it. Now, the legal thinking is extremely contrived and we would completely disagree with it, but someone needs to kind of do that, and they did that. And so the actors that we hear about aren't the ones who are doing that. And then the same for the impeachment. When Mueller came out with his report, these guys issued a huge, I think they even called it roadmap to impeachment or something like that. Same for Ukraine. And then, of course, same for January 6th. And now, of course, same for the whole Stormy Daniels situations. Sometimes I lose sight of all these cases. I mean, there's kind of four major thrusts against Trump in the legal arena. Anyway, all of them have these people behind it. And it's very disconcerting for various reasons, which we can get into. But in the main part, I think, first of all, people need to be made aware of this fact.
You made a very good point that, we kind of have these cutouts that are carrying the work of people like Eisen. And, I'll give you an example, a small one, but there was a list of witnesses that Norman Eisen had put down that he thought should come forth, that Fannie Willis should call in her trial of Trump. And that list of witnesses ran a couple pages in length. Well, guess what happened? Fannie Willis called exactly those people. Some of his work has been so detailed, and he typically operates where he does an introductory volume, and it's not any joke. Usually his reports are, 250, 300 pages, and then he follows up with a volume 2. That's typically how he operates. And he literally in his second legal brief, it was so detailed. One had the effect that Fannie Willis could have literally cut and pasted it and put that work in. And I'm guessing that she probably did exactly that. There's too many instances of things that he had listed that then appeared. Same thing happened in Mueller, where Eisen focused in on these obscure statutes that could be used by Mueller, and then Mueller used them. He looked at things whereby Mueller could refer Trump to Congress. Mueller tried to do that. So it's this ongoing pattern, and he just skates by, and he ends up being this kind of aw shucks guy that appears on every MSNBC show that's ever had, CNN. I think that's where he's technically a contributor.
Enforcement Act of 1870. This is a charge they brought against Trump in terms of the January 6th. Now, that is about, that is post-Civil War. That is about physically tying people up or threatening them to not vote or vote a certain way, in terms of that whole era. Well, Who dug that up? Who brought that up? I'm sure he was behind that too. So it's that sort of the esoteric things that they come and dig up out of somewhere, and then they throw it out there and say, well, this is the roadmap, and then they call it roadmap. This is the most frustrating part of it. All of these actions that these people take, mainly, lawfare in general, Eisen specifically, they're not done like in secret. They are done very openly. Unfortunately, they're not reported, which is what we keep saying here. But in general, they are very ascertainable in terms of, you just you look at lawfare, look at their blog, look at what they say. It's very obvious what they want to achieve. They want to get Trump. They have wanted to get Trump for the past 7-8 years. That's their entire focus. And they will go and find these esoteric laws, old laws, whatever, and they'll come up with these strange theories. And, very successfully in a way, because we don't know the outcome of the New York case. We can come back to that in a moment. But the fact that there are all these cases and the fact that Trump has been charged in all these matters and so on really comes back to these guys.
Yeah, it was Eisen that came up with the esoteric Section 1512 for the Mueller investigation. And he was pushing that, and again, then sure enough, it's a very broad. It's a never used statute effectively, and it's very broad, which is why he chose it. And then sure enough, Mueller seizes on that in his report. Of course, Mueller wasn't really running things anyway, so what we were really seeing was a conduit from Eisen to Weissman. Is what was actually taking place. And it's also worth noting that these guys are well funded, and both Witts and Eisen are funded by Brookings directly. Both are fellows at Brookings, and all of these reports have a Brookings stamp on them. Some more direct than others, where it's a literal, pretty bound volume from Brookings authored by Eisen. In other cases, these things are Eisen reports that have a Brookings stamp and Brookings funding. But Brookings is a constant. Another element that's here is Crew. And Eisen actually was a co-founder of Crew. And they were involved. You remember that 14th Amendment claim that it wasn't all that long ago, maybe 9 months ago, that people should enact the 14th Amendment and have Trump removed. And they never gave any great reason for it. All of that traced back to a petition and a paper done by Crew. So it's like you said, these guys are kind of bald-faced about these things. They're not really trying to hide them. Another area where all these people still operate in is these political war games, planning out for elections. Eisen was all over the map doing those things, and of course they were eerily correct. Somehow he magically was able to predict that we were going to be in a contested election, that Biden was going to come from behind after Election Day, and that we were going to be in a period of kind of constitutional crisis. He predicted everything down to almost the smallest detail, which of course raises its own set of questions. He kind of knew too much in advance. He was too accurate.
Aspen Institute as well, being able to war game the Hunter Biden laptop story a month before the New York Post even got the laptop. How did they know? That's always, it's never been answered. And this is leads to kind of another frustration I have here, is that there's so much information out there. I mean, it's kind of a bit like COVID origin. All the information is out there, and yet the story is not out there.
Well, we do know one avenue where they got that, and that would have been Ellen Nakashima, because she was the reporter for the Washington Post, was part of that Aspen War Games. And she actually had what I believe is a complete copy of the laptop. Of course, she never published on it. Imagine being a reporter for the Washington Post and you have an early copy of the Hunter laptop, which she admitted to. She claimed it was partial. I think it was probably everything, but regardless, she knew it was real. It had been authenticated. The FBI already had it. And she never published it, but instead she participated in these war games with Eisen and others, how to game plan for when it did become public. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling if you think about it, from her being a reporter.
It is. I always thought, in terms of the immediacy of doing this war gaming, this whole thing, and basically planning for exactly what happened. What happens if it comes out? Okay, we're going to put a shut on everything to do with social media. We're going to shut it off there. We're going to put out a letter saying this is a Russian plot. Everything that happened was gamed out ahead of time. I don't want to digress too far here, but look, I think there's only two options because, as you mentioned, the FBI had it and had authenticated it a year earlier. So someone in the FBI, gave these guys a heads up. Option one or option two, or a combination of those options, is they were spying on Rudy Giuliani at the time, in terms of a criminal investigation. Supposedly, remember, because of his Ukrainian contacts, which is all rubbish anyway. But that was going on at the time, and it was at the time that Rudy was in communications with the lawyer for the laptop repair guy to get a copy. So they would have known the FBI had it, and they would have known, or a combination thereof, they would have known that Rudy has it, so therefore it will soon come out. So somehow putting all that together, and of course, as you say, it was shared with certain people like Nakashima. So a combination of those, or one of those, is what triggered this whole thing. But again, we know this. We know that they wargamed it a month or so ahead of time. And yet, this isn't widely reported. I mean, no one kind of appreciates the impact of that, because, of course, the fact that they knew it and they wargamed it is further proof that it was real from day one, and that everything that followed this wargaming was a cover-up.
Yeah, and it's an answer. I would guess it's kind of all of the above as to how this happened with the actions of the FBI, et cetera. And part of the wargaming were the exact scenarios that Giuliani would leak the information, it would make it out, and it would get picked up. They effectively, they knew what was transpiring, so it wasn't guesswork. They knew what was coming, it just hadn't actually physically happened yet, and they were operating as to how do we respond to this. And that's FBI, right around the same time that they began to get busy circling up with the IC community, and lo and behold, we get this letter from the 50 former intelligence officials. And everybody puts a lot of emphasis on the former part of it, and nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that those 50 former intelligence officials included 5 former CIA directors. So the whole idea that it's these former officials who are retired is just nonsense. They had all their clearances, and it was the top intelligence officials in the United States that were part of this. So
the question then becomes, will any of this ever be known, right? So history is written by whoever wins. So this brings us to 2024, brings us back to the New York case. First of all, if any of this will ever be kind of captured by history, if history is not going to record Trump as this guy who, cheated and defrauded and was involved with this horrible Ukraine thing, and Giuliani is horrible, and if it's not going to be that way, the first thing that has to happen is Trump has to win, because otherwise it will be that way. And then even if he wins, the second thing that has to happen is that he or the people around him will have to show a bit of just focus, really, just patience and focus and determination, and then get back to these issues, which I think is so important to really put the record straight on all these matters.
Yeah, when you say issues, you're talking about setting the historical record right. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, Russiagate, Ukrainegate, January 6th, the whole Hunter laptop. I mean, the list is long. How the whole Ukraine war started. I mean, we have a tape of Nuland saying that Joe Biden greenlighted it back in 2014. And by Ukraine war, I mean their civil war, which then led to the wider war. So again, I'm sometimes, actually more than sometimes, concerned that most of this will somehow be lost to history, and then we'll have a Biden history. Long after we're all dead, or when we're very old men or whatever, there will be a Biden history. The Biden way of looking at it, or the Democrat kind of account of things, will be the way it will be captured. And to be honest, I kind of, my main motivation in doing this, or kind of being a journalist pro tempore, what we're doing right now in terms of not our usual things, our day job kind of things, is because I don't want history to record falsehoods and lies and untruths. And by the way, this of course applies to COVID as well.
Yeah, I guess my hope is that Trump is really, really pissed off that, having gone through all this and being dragged through these court cases, that, he's maybe finally learned that lesson that you actually have to tackle this thing head on. You can't make friends with these people. He tried to kind of walk his way through his first term, and of course, here we are, with the attacks unabated, if anything, with a frenzy now, realizing that he has to go after these people, and I hope they know who they have to go after, because it's unfortunately a long list. We have seen a lot of nervous-looking people on TV lately. I don't know.
Because it looks good, in terms of his election prospects. And I know we're going to come back here to the New York case in a moment, but it was a very, to me, kind of a watershed moment in this whole, how does Trump approach these things? And it was the day when it was the day after he was acquitted in the Senate of the first impeachment, the Ukraine impeachment. You remember he had that big press conference and he had the big headline, I think it was Washington Post or whatever, acquitted or whatever it was, like this, just in giant words. And it was a big celebration they had at the White House. And even listening to his words, that was the end of it. It was like, I've been acquitted, that's it. And I was fuming. I was like, no, this is the start of getting all the people who did this to you. This is the start of going after Joe Biden for what he did in Ukraine, which is how all this started. This is the start of going after Vindman and Sierra Mella and all those people. Because now you're acquitted, now you go after them. And then that never happened. It was like, that was the ending party. I think it was actually February. Well, it was in February of 2020. And it might have been sort of the day after Fauci's secret teleconference, which I don't know, we get into sort of the meanings of all of that and the entanglements there. But it was right around that time where, and of course, Fauci's secret teleconference was the new plot against Trump. So it was being brewed up at the exact same time that Trump was celebrating his victory in the Senate. And it's just no good doing that if you don't then take the win and then really crack down on the perpetrators. You need to go after them. Otherwise, it will just keep happening over and over. Plus, like with Fauci, plus history will record everything falsely.
Well, and there was no assist either. It wasn't just Trump who was sort of celebrating and over. The GOP did nothing. Think about what happened with the election in terms of fortifying the election. Well, Democrats sure as heck fortified their version of the election, and the GOP did nothing. Just seemed to have no preparation. Barr, something seemed to materially change with him in kind of the middle of 2020, and he refused to look into things, and it was this downward spiral. So it's kind of a good point. Is there's no celebrating, right? As you said, that was what should have been the starting point. And instead it was this terminus for one group of people, but for Democrats, they were off and running harder than ever. They just redoubled their efforts.
Exactly right. Just by defeating them in court or defeating them in the battleground of ideas or whatever we want to call all these things, none of that matters. I mean, Andrew Weissman was defeated 9-0 in the Supreme Court in the Enron case. It was that just goes to show how much he needed the help of these lawfare people to kind of lead the way for him with the law, because he doesn't appear to be very good with it. Doesn't matter. He just kept going and going, and then he became part of Mueller, and then he ran Mueller, and then he just, they never stop. They just keep going and going and going. So the only way to make them stop is to go after them, put them in defense, and that just hasn't happened at all.
No, and I've argued for some time that somebody, I think you probably have too, that somebody needs to go to prison. There has to be consequences. And that's, until there's some sort of serious consequence, career-ending consequences for some major figure, and hopefully more than one, there's no penalty, so why would they stop? They're just going to keep going, and that's exactly what they've done. I think guys like Eisen, I'm sure they take it with deadly seriousness, but I also think they feel it's like a game. It's a giant political game that they play, and they're probably almost puzzled why we aren't playing that game. We meaning Republicans and the Trump administration at the time.
They must feel so lucky. So, for instance, think of the situation with all the leaks against Trump, like throughout the 4 years, but especially early on. Of course, the first leak was the fake leak. It was just fake in terms of Ignatius and General Flynn. That was purely designed to get Flynn fired because it said Flynn talked about sanctions. Well, eventually we got the transcript. He did not talk about sanctions. That was a fake leak, but that story, that one story broke General Flynn. And this was before Trump was even inaugurated. And I would argue in many ways it broke Trump. I mean, he's obviously, looking pretty good now. So I guess he's never kind of really broken. But in terms of messing up the first 4 years, that story to me is absolutely pivotal. It wasn't a day or two before when they released the Steele dossier. It was the story about Flynn, because then Flynn was a guy who could have advised him on all this crap, and he was gone within like a couple of weeks. And of course, the stench of him having to resign, and it was just very, very bad from day one. Okay,
a felony leak of his phone call, and nobody's been fingered for that.
And here's the thing, and this ties in with what we're just talking about. Guess whom Jeff Sessions did go and have arrested? Reality Winner. This nobody who leaked something which is completely irrelevant. It was just, the whole thing was just a joke. And she went to jail for 5 years or something? And it was almost like the swamp was like, well, look, the leak, we took care of it. And the swamp includes GOP, a lot of them. And again, so if they do take some action, if people do have to go to jail, if things do happen, they pick these fall guys like Reality Winner. We're like, oh, look, we took care of the leaks, and never went after, well, they could have gone after Ignatius really, really hard, like they're going after Catherine Herridge on the former Fox News, or how they went after the Ashley Biden diary issue. It is possible. You know where to go. I mean, you just turn the screws on Ignatius. Say, who the hell gave you this thing? And I think, of course, someone knows who did that, and it was probably someone within government. And in the end, the point is the swamp will protect itself, and they will fall. They find a fall guy. Like with COVID, Daszak seems now to be the fall guy. I mean, the newest on that is that they have Daszak has now been debarred personally. In a letter to him personally, nothing to do with equal. Like you are now like persona non grata. Well, fantastic, but we know why this is happening. Why is the U.S. government now doing this to Peter Daszak? Because he's a fall guy. Because they don't want us to jail Fauci, jail Morans, jail all these people at the top, Collins, and so on. So coming back, basically, I'm responding to your point in a kind of a long-winded way here. If they do have to eventually put someone in jail or come after someone or do something, it's always some fall guy.
Well, to me, this is always a great data point that falls in line with the Flynn call. Trump knew early on in his administration that he was facing a lot of leaks from the intelligence community. He wasn't sure where they were coming from. And he elected to do, you remember when he was doing his own press conferences in the very beginning? Well, he appeared at a press conference and announced that he'd done a sting. And it was real simple. He knew that he announced some information. He didn't tell anybody around him. So none of his staff knew, nobody. Only the people present at the meeting knew this. Well, who was at the meeting? It was James Clapper. And that information immediately got leaked to the press. And Trump went and announced it. And Clapper the next day put out this kind of, we deeply regret, any leaks coming from the intelligence community. We'll do anything to stop them. What he was basically saying is, yeah, it was me, I got caught. And I think Trump sort of thought, like, okay, that takes care of the problem. I just showed you that I know it's you, and that was going to be the end of it. And once again, that wasn't the end of it. That was the beginning of the leaks from the intelligence community, because nothing happened.
So what do? You tell your Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, you got to prosecute that guy. If Sessions doesn't do it, fire him. If next guy doesn't do it, fire him. Okay. Yep. I bet you there were a dozen kind of, Georgetown master's degree type advisors, around Trump in there. The sort of the GOP version of Sierra Mella, saying, oh, no, you can't do that. The press will be terrible. And they say, you fired your Attorney General and whatever. Well, look at what else they did to him and what he came through. I mean, he fired Scaramucci after a few days. I mean, he fired Flynn. I know that caused him a lot of problems, but he fired, various people after short periods of time. Eventually, kind of people forgot. he had all kinds of, bad press about it. The whole Mueller thing and everything, Ukraine, everything they threw at this guy. And in the end, the straw that broke the camel's back was none of those things. He would have won easily, despite all of those things. It was COVID and the COVID cover-up that got him in the end. And of course, the election fraud, which ties in with COVID and all these COVID measures. So, with all that in mind, I guess the lesson here for term two, if there is a term two, is don't worry about what some stupid advisor from Georgetown master's degree type tells you. If it needs to be done, get it done. And if the guy won't do it, fire the guy and have some other guy do it. Of course, second term is always easier to do these things anyway. But sometimes I doubt that. First of all, first he needs to get elected, and the main reason why I doubt that is because Democrats always have something up their sleeve. There's going to be, a new fortification. There's going to be something, and then even if he gets in, he'll be stymied in every way. And then third of all, he might not have the stomach to do all that because he doesn't want to look bad. And I do worry about that part because I think you mentioned earlier, maybe he's pissed enough not to care about that part anymore.
Well, I certainly hope so because, I can understand what he was trying to do and not understanding how nefarious and how just ill-willed all these people are. Remember, he, his whole campaign promise to prosecute Hillary Clinton, and he wins the election, and the first thing he does is effectively say that, hey, I'm kind of willing to let bygones be bygones. Well, to me, that was kind of the moment that the deep state woke up and thought, we have free reign here. We can do whatever we want. And, their biggest fear, I think about it this way, their biggest fear is that they're going to be treated, and I think they view the world like this, that they're going to be treated in the same manner that they would treat you. And they both fear and expect that, and when it doesn't happen, that's when they take notice and think that they can get away with whatever they want. Now, I do think they're a little more worried about that this time around, that if Trump takes office, that he is going to be more serious about that, and he is going to go after him. That's my fervent hope, and the proof will be in the election, so to speak, I guess. But
yeah, so with that, Jeff, what do we do? What do we say? Where are we with this New York case? I mean, it's done as with the jury. Now, first of all, this is really weird, right? I mean, every time we've ever followed a case, it's like when it's with the jury, it's with the jury. Not with this Juan Merchan guy. What does he do? He sends the jury home for a week. You just sent them home for a week. So, of course, now the jury will be at home being bombarded with, MSNBC and New York Times and all this rubbish. And next week they can come back and deliver their verdict. So he's kind of given them time to think. Because I guess anyone who had sat in that courtroom, if they had been asked, okay, now straight from Cohen, we go to the jury room, well, there's going to be at least one in those 12 who's going to say, look, Cohen is not a credible person, and he's the only one that we have to rely on here in terms of Trump having known about that. This is what the whole case comes down to. Did Trump forget about all the fact that it shouldn't have been a case and it's a federal thing, and forget about all of those things. Let's just assume there is something to it. You still get stuck on Cohen because Cohen is the only person in the entire saga who is willing to say that Trump was part of this from day one. That's eventually, where you end up. And anyone with a functioning brain who's fair and honest will say, look, you just can't trust anything this Cohen character says. I mean, he was caught in a lie on the stand and very openly. So the fact that this is very visceral. Remember when he was caught in a lie? This is so visceral for a jury. And if you put them in a jury room straight away, well, everyone's going to say, you can't trust this guy. Well, at least some of them might say that. So I thought that sending them home, supposedly it's so that the lawyers can prepare their closing statements. You could have taken care of those issues earlier. So I think that's very, very bad. But okay, where do you think this is going to end up?
Well, I was actually going to turn around and punt and ask you, because what I'm curious about is what are your thoughts are. Like, I think it's kind of hard to predict normally, actually, it'd be very easy to predict the DC jury. Cohen was so bad that it's not as easy for me to predict. I still think there's a good chance that somebody comes back and just says, I just can't get past Cohen. That testimony was so awful. That's the testimony that left Anderson Cooper speechless. I can't believe this guy is their witness.
And Wolf Blitzer as well. I mean, you had the double whammy, the double CNN. You had both Wolf and Cooper. Whoa, I agree with you. And something, I guess my gut feeling is that there will be a holdout. I think it'll be one. So, it will come down to one. But I kind of still I love New York. I love visiting. I'm not sure I'd like to live there, but I love walking around Manhattan. I did up and down, and I just love all aspects of it. Even now. But I'm kind of hopeful that among all those people there, they chose 12, of which one will still be just honest enough, fair enough to see what was obvious for everyone to see, and to kind of either who doesn't hate Trump sufficiently to convict, or who is just fair-minded enough to go, okay, we can't do this. So that would be my prediction. Hung
The
jury
question
by
I was
one.
going to have for you is, what happens if this goes to appeal? Given all the antics that Merchant played, the judge was just every day I'd be shaking my head at quotes that I would see that would come out from his little, mini rulings throughout the day, evidence he wouldn't allow to be admitted, etc., where he'd done exactly the opposite for the other side. It just, the disparity was just so glaring throughout this thing.
The problem with appeals in general, this is not just Merchant, this is not just New York, this is like anywhere, is that it is extremely difficult to overturn a jury verdict. It's just as a starting matter, it's just extremely, extremely difficult. Even if you have 100 grounds and they're extremely good grounds, and it's just something that is any appellate court will just make you jump through so many hoops, and of course it will drag on for a very long time. And it's just because it comes down to the idea that, well, there was these 12 people and they were juries of his peers. And by the way, they're not peers in the United States. There are no longer peers in those kinds of areas if you're a Republican. There are no juries of peers in San Francisco or New York or DC or whatever. That is a stupid concept. It doesn't work anymore. But because conceptually that's still this sort of impression, or the what's being put out there, like, oh, jury, you can't overturn a jury, these are 12 people from the public who decided. It's just extremely difficult. So it's been, I think, misportrayed a bit in general, especially in sort of conservative media, that, oh, he's got a million grounds to appeal and so on. Yeah, and there are some good ones and there's some really bad, but first of all, you need to have really bad rulings, which you did have, and you need to flag them up, which they did do. They did a better job with this Trump's legal team than with the previous case. This what was that woman called? The Bloomingdale's lady, Carol something. Right?
Jean Carroll.
Yeah, the lawyers didn't do a good job, because each time that you think the judge messed up badly, you need to put it on the record right away. And anyway, leaving all that aside, it's extremely difficult. They do have good grounds, but don't think just because it's fair or it should be, or the judge obviously did horrible things, he was obviously biased, don't think that will automatically lead to this thing being overturned. And of course, it cannot be pardoned by the federal side. You can't pardon a state offense. So he couldn't pardon himself if he became president. I would not count on that at all. I would say the chances of that are pretty slim in general, and specifically here, maybe because it's Trump, maybe a bit higher, but it could go the other way. Also, who are going to be the appellate judges? I mean, what I'm trying to say is, let's not even try and go there. Let's try and hope that there's this one person on that jury who just says, no, I'm not going along with this whole scam.
My assumption when the jury was sent home is not only was it time for them to kind of get distance between the Cohen testimony, which probably was the primary purpose, but also that maybe pressure could be brought to bear on those jurors, even if it's just friends and family, et cetera. Come on, you're not going to let him off, are you? You're gonna put in a guilty vote here, right? That there's going to be some of that aspect. So what happens if everybody comes back and says he's guilty?
Well, this is the big question. So let's start with if he's not guilty, then which is impossible. There's no way that 12 Manhattan jurors will say, no, he's not guilty. I don't think that's going to happen. if that were to happen, I think we can just basically, Democrats are not going to win 2024, even if they try everything and anything, because I think even sort of liberals would be pretty flabbergasted that a liberal jury would acquit this guy, and then they would really understand that this was all a scam to begin with, and so on. So, but anyway, that's not going to happen. So I think we have either hung jury or conviction. So let's start with hung jury. I think if it's a hung jury, it's a draw. It's not going to tell us anything for 2024, because everyone's going to get what they want out of it. Like, well, obviously, that he didn't do any of those bad things, is what Republicans will say, and the other side will say, well, it's just one holdout, blah blah blah. So I think it's just not going to do anything and sway anything in any way. So I think your point your question is exactly the one we ought to focus on. What happens if there's a conviction? How's that going to play out? I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, it could go either way. It will have an effect. I think if there's a conviction, it will not be just neutral, everything as it was. I think it will have an effect. I'd say maybe 60-40, the effect would be negative, because from henceforth, the media will call him a convicted felon. That's all they'll ever call him by for the rest of time. That may leave kind of a stain in people's minds. But I don't know, maybe people will just say, no, this should not be done to a former president. And anyway, I'm kind of if there is a conviction, I think it's sort of going to be 60-40, 70-30 is my guess, bad for Trump in terms of 2024. Well, what about you? What do you think?
It's kind of funny because we just got a reminder, we were just wondering, which case was that? And I was literally cycling through for a moment and thinking about Fani Willis, Jack Smith, it's just which of the cases was it? Every time you think we're done with this, we're not done with this.
So what's your prediction in terms of, first of all, what do you think is going to happen? And second of all, what do you think the fallout is going to be?
I think that there's probably going to be a hung jury, and I think it's going to be same as it ever was, that everybody is sort of in their respective camps already, and they're going to stay in their respective camps. I don't know about you, but I keep feeling like there's this sort of underlying sea change, not for the crazy left, that they're always going to be that way and they're not going to change their mind, but so many normal people. I cannot go, I live in a very liberal spot, and I cannot go to the grocery store. It's impossible to not be in the grocery store and have people bitch about how bad prices are. And I don't think anybody wants to see, most people probably, as liberals, don't want to say it out loud, but they know where this is coming from, that it's Biden. It just feels like there's kind of a fundamental undercurrent of change. My concern is, what are the things we don't know about? What are the plots that are being put in place that aren't visible to us yet? We know that the left is already trying to remove the Insurrection Act from Trump's arsenal, so that if all the rioters, et cetera, get deployed, that he might not be able to use that. And the Insurrection Act is something that, they used it for the LA riots. It could be used much broader. It's a wide-ranging act that you could use to quell, kind of national disturbance. And they're trying to take that away from his arsenal, with it's a tacit admission that they think he's going to win, but they're trying to destabilize his administration, coincidentally with the admission that they intend to unleash all the Antifa, Black Lives Matters, et cetera. So, I just think it's going to be chaos, and I'm kind of not sure where the chaos is going to come from.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be chaos, and I agree with all of that. Totally uncharted waters in terms of what would happen if Trump were to win the election. It's just, will Democrats kind of pretend to play nice like they did in 2016, and then ramp up the lawfare, which they will do anyway, or will they just ramp up lawfare anyway, just not even pretend to be nice? That was kind of my first. I think that's the first sort of strategic choice.
Well, it seems like with every step and every year that we go through, mostly focused on elections, sort of this 4-year cycle, but norms keep getting broken, and the left realizes that, well, it was kind of just an invisible wall. It was just a barrier we thought was there. But when we actually walked through it, nothing really happened to us. Nobody really stopped us. in terms of the way they treated the Supreme Court, congressional norms, et cetera, attacks. The fact that they raided Mar-a-Lago, all of these things have been broken. And it's just this continual sort of move away from the Constitution. And there's no pulling back. There's nothing that happens that stops that. So from their perspective, they're just emboldened to keep going until something does stop them, which really doesn't bode very well for this country.
Well, I think we can say the same for so many different things, culturally, politically, in any which way, that every time they get a little win in some way and there's no pushback, they'll take more. Look at COVID origin, for instance, which, you and I have talked about so much, but I keep coming back to because it's in a way the issue of our time, because it's geopolitical. What do you do about China? It's about all our future, whether we will even get to the next generation, because now that anyone can cook up these viruses in their labs, if the Chinese had just done a different one, we'd all be dead now. I mean, there's so many, and the way, of course, they took out Trump with it. I mean, there's so many different angles to COVID origin, which to me, that's why I keep coming back to this. Such a fascinating issue. But even that one is exactly like you say. Fauci tried his fraudulent push at the beginning of February in terms of, this is totally natural. There was no pushback. They put out this fraudulent Lancet letter, which is just a total fraud. If you look at the footnote, it said, even NASEM agrees this is natural. Then you go to the NASEM letter that they footnoted in the fake Lancet letter, and the NASEM letter doesn't say anything of the kind. So if the media had been paying attention at the time, they'd have been like, well, this doesn't say what you say it says. So let's, what are you on about? Let's try and dig here. Never did that. And then they got away with that, the fraudulent Lancet letter. So what did they do next? The fraudulent proximal origin paper, which is an even bigger fraud. I mean, that was just such a patent fraud. If you look at footnote 20, it says, because no virus like this has ever been seen, therefore it must be, or used in a lab, therefore it must be natural. You go to the footnote 20, that footnote is from 2014. Again, anyone who was paying attention, which the media should have done, should have said, well, sorry, you're missing 6 years here. Any virus could have been developed in those 6 years, which are not, So again, fraud. But as you said, I don't want to go on too long here, but every time they got away with it. Fauci refunded Daszak in 2020 after Trump took the money away. He just refunded him. He got away with it. And as you say, they just, every time they get away with it, they take more. And we can apply this to pretty much any topic. And this is this needs to stop.
One of the biggest things that's happened that, we've talked about a whole bunch of times, but it's just always worth coming back to is what Elon did with X. Because all of these things that you're talking about, the footnote, proximal origin, et cetera, proximal fraud, whenever we try to shine light on that, and by we, I mean the larger community of investigators, what happened? People were banned right and left. You couldn't find any results on Google. Everybody was shadow banned or just outright banned. And, this time around, things are very different. And you can see a little bit of a shock on the side of the left is the fact that this is happening. Suddenly they're on their heels a little bit with that, although I would argue that maybe just makes them more dangerous. But, that is the one positive, is that at least now information has the ability to come out, even with all the censoring that Google and everybody else is doing. That at least on Twitter, this information is still able to come forth, where before it just couldn't.
Yeah, that's right. I guess on that note, is there anything else you wanted to kind of add? I think we pretty much covered it. We have our predictions in, and I think we both predict hung jury and no fallout either way.
Yeah, I guess probably just the thing to end on is just a wish that Trump, has truly learned his lesson, and that Trump is deeply, deeply angry, and that he's got the right people. Because again, nothing is going to change until some of these people are held accountable. I'd love for it to be everybody. I don't see how it can be everybody, but there needs to at least be several high-profile names that are held to account. And if that doesn't happen, nothing's going to change.